precise rules for how a woman should behave, about how a man should behave, how you should behave to your neighbor, and any transgressions could lead with horrible, hideous violence. This is what happened to Pearl Traxler. His only guilty thing that he'd done was he danced with the prettiest girl in the room called Lily Hinkle. Then south of town as well. One day, Niccolo Vinceri leaves his house on South 18th Street. Very early in the morning, about 5 a.m., he takes his light and a bag of oats to feed the animals in his barn. And as he emerges from his house, he is shot and killed, ambushed by somebody that had been waiting for him all night. There were rumors. An unknown Italian in town had been seen getting on an early morning train, and Mrs. Vinceri told the police we'd been having blank-hand letters. Across the street at 1607 South 18th, a man had left his work, or Tony Matto had left the 30 mine and started north. He put 15 cents in his pocket so he could go to a movie. And he arrives at 1607, and if you're wondering which that is, when you go over where the railroad track was on South 18th, you know, there's that little rise and bumps you can sort of feel. When you go over there, it's the first house on the left, and it doesn't bear any resemblance now to the house that I see photographed in the newspaper. In fact, there are little sort of copper awnings over that building, but that's the site of the house. And at 1607, we know that Tony Matto, leaving work, started up that sidewalk, then started up the house to 1607, where Carmela Russo was sitting outside. As he approached, neighbors watched, and they said there was a brief conversation between them, and Tony Matto touched her arm, she whipped out a gun, and she shot him. He raced away from her, going all the way down the back alley, and Heidi Voxman took me down there so I could see the actual spot. All the kids would go and look at it. And she shot him 6 or 7 times more. She then very calmly returned to the house, called the local police, and said, "I've killed a man, come and get me." She was put on trial in this room on the 20th of September, 1920. The story began to emerge from the various witnesses. Carmela was very popular in this town. She worked in this building in the Appanoose Realty. She understood a lot. She could speak Spanish, she could speak English, she could speak Italian. And she would translate a lot of the documents of people applying for citizenship. She was regarded as quiet, as controlled, and very likable. She told the story that Tony Matto had been sexually harassing her, but he went a bit further. Carmela was engaged to a man called Cosimo Malone, another Italian who was then working in Rock Island. And Tony Matto had written a letter to Cosimo Malone saying he'd had this lovely girl, Carmela, and not only had he had her, but she'd gone to Des Moines for an illegal surgery. Now this, of course, was contrary again to Southern Italian ways of life. So Cosimo Malone broke the engagement. And it's at that point that Carmela said she had no other choice than to kill Tony Matto. Her lawyer, Mr. Wilson, said, "Do you have any regrets for the way you behaved in killing him?" And she said, "I have no regrets whatsoever. I would do it again." She was found guilty of manslaughter and given 8 years at Rockwell City Reformatory for Women. The night that she left town, she married Cosimo Malone. She had a baby by him, and when she was released by a governor who gave her a pardon after about 5 years, she came back to live South Central, had another child by Cosimo Malone, and then proceeded to file for divorce. She said, "This man is extremely violent. He's tried to kill me several times and my 2 daughters. She was granted the divorce, and Cosimo Malone was absolutely furious. He kept arriving at the house on South 18th with some henchmen. Repeatedly, the police were called to protect the family, and the violence was being threatened the whole time. A couple of months later, Carmela had a 15-year-old sister called Constanza. Constanza suddenly disappeared. She had been abducted by these gentlemen like Cosimo Malone, who was now living in Chicago and almost certainly was a member of a gang. There was uproar because immediately George Russo, who was quite famous in this town, he was a big union leader, and in a moment you're going to find he's one of the people that are going to stand up to the KKK. So George Russo immediately demanded action from the police station. You've got to do something about this girl. Suddenly they get a letter from Chicago, from Constanza, saying, "Daddy, stop worrying. I've agreed to go through a marriage with Cosimo Malone." This is our brother-in-law. You're still following me, right? She will go through a marriage with him. Her father now believed she was bringing terrible disgrace to the whole community. She lived with Cosimo Malone. Constanza lived with Cosimo Malone about a week. She ran away from him. She ran away up to the part of Iowa on the Mississippi River, Davenport, and those cities, and she tried to hide with an Italian family. Cosimo Malone found her. He shot her. He shot her twice, one bullet catching her just sort of in the shoulder and the other in the jaw. While she was in hospital, George Russo sent her a telegram, and it said, "Glad you were shot. Too bad you're not dead." He still felt the shame that had happened, and there was always a rumor that Carmela had arranged the abduction of Constanza with this group to go to Chicago so that her family would be more protected. So these were a lot of the stories that were beginning to emerge. And into the middle of this mix came the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution, known as Prohibition. It's hard to imagine that a more unsuitable law for the Italians, the Greeks, the Sicilians, the Croatians could possibly have been passed. To all of those people in that culture, a glass of wine with your evening meal is a standard process of life and part of sheer enjoyment of living. So it's no surprise at all, is it, that there were illegal stills being formed around town almost immediately. They were out of Clarkdale first, then Mystic, and then, by and large, south of town. And at first it appeared like a fairly innocent sort of thing, right? They were just making a couple of gallons in the basement and bringing them up and having a cup of tea or a glass of wine. See my background now. More sober than a glass of wine anyway, right? So they would just have it with friends, or there were speakeasies in town. It would be informal. You could always tell if it was informal, by the way, because the liquor called